Welcome everyone to Cultivating Courage, Confidence, and Grace for Women in Identity with co-host and Women in Identity Platinum sponsor Onfido and special guest UPFRONT. A few housekeeping items, as I said before we get started. This webinar will be recorded. All of Women in Identity's webinars are recorded, and then it will be posted on our YouTube channel and also shared across our socials. Everyone, we ask will remain muted during the conversation, and we ask that you keep your cameras off. And then if you have any questions, please raise your hand, put them in the chat box, and we'll try and answer some questions in real time, but then also those questions that we can't answer in real time will come to you at the end of the presentation. So then that wraps up the housekeeping items. And just want to give a little bit of information about Women in Identity. So Women in Identity is an international not-for-profit organization that was founded in 2019. The mission of the organization is to drive the digital identity industry to build solutions with diverse teams to promote universal access, which enables civic, social, and economic empowerment around the world. And every day that we're able to act on our mission, it gets us one step closer to that vision of digital identity solutions intended for everyone are built by everyone. And of course, we would not be able to do all that we do without the generous support of our sponsors. As I said, Onfido is a platinum sponsor. They are very actively engaged with women in identity and very supportive of the broader community. So we're super excited to be collaborating with them in 2023. Our progress since 2019. The organization has seen exponential growth over the years. We have 2,600 plus individual members. Membership is free, so I encourage everyone, if you are not already a member of the organization, to please come and join us, and encourage those in your networks to do so as well. We have 35 plus volunteers around the world. It is, again, an international organization, global reach. We've organized more than 40 events, and we have a presence in over 30 countries. If you have any questions specifically related to Women in Identity, please contact us at info@womeninidentity.org. You can also follow us on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as well. And then please visit our website, womeninidentity.org. Check us out, see what there is there. And we would love to have you become a part of our community if you aren't already, and looking forward to actively engaging with everyone. So then our speakers, here they are: Nancy Vance, Head of Global Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at Onfido, and Lauren Currie, Founder, UPFRONT. So super excited about this conversation that's about to take place. Many of you have spent the last 3 years lurching from one event to another, hungry for community, hope, and real significant change. How do you show up in the world with less overwhelm and more confidence? Enter stage left, Nancy Onfido and Lauren Currie. Lauren is on a mission to support 1 million women with confidence, and has joined forces with Nancy to support the women in the identity industry. In this fireside chat, Lauren and Nancy will share behind the scenes of their collaboration to cultivate a culture of courage and confidence. They'll share stories, insights, and tools that you can implement tomorrow. They'll also deep dive into this year's International Women's Day theme of embracing equity, and you will leave with tactics and strategies to activate confidence in yourself and your team. They'll look directly at the reality of working in a male-dominated industry. So without further ado, I will hand the floor over to Nancy Vance.
Yay. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Whether you're starting your day like me with a cup of coffee or winding down with your favorite beverage, we're so happy to have you here today and be getting to deep dive a little bit with our friend Lauren. And by way of introduction, we talked about she is the founder of UPFRONT, trustee and chairperson of Pregnant Then Screwed, as well as awarded the OBE for her services for design and diversity. So welcome, Lauren. We're so happy to have you here today. And just
Thank you.
Yeah, just to give a little bit of additional color to our partnership, we have been really in cahoots now for a couple years. So we've had the pleasure of working together. We've gotten to see upwards of 40 Onfido women kind of blossom through your bonds. And there are just like so many palpable ways that UPFRONT's programming has visibly uplifted Onfido's women. And, this advocacy, awareness, and confidence are to name a few. And I actually did want to quote one such Onfidoer who actually said, "I have become more vocal advocate for myself and other women around me. Now I own up to my achievements and success without a second thought." So it's just been like joyous really to see that unfold. And then similarly, we chose to sponsor Women in Identity to help elevate talented women in the identity space. So, thinking about that, I was like, well, it really only makes sense to merge these worlds and like ungate some of your strategies for these amazing women in identity. So with that, I would love if you would just open it up and tell us how you got into this work and your beginnings.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for that introduction. We are super proud of the work that we've done with Onfidoers. And of course, you've also generously sponsored our up and coming conference, which is happening in less than 3 weeks. So I'm really happy to be joining forces in a more public forum, and I hope that lots of new folks will find out about Onfido and women in identity, and that hopefully lots of new folks from Onfido will find out about UPFRONT. So really happy to be here. And one thing I wanted to share before we get into the depths of our chat is a tool that we really like to use at UPFRONT when we are in a digital environment is what we call a +1. And so it's almost like a digital clap or cheer or smile. It's a way, yeah, or this. So you'll see +1s have come already for the folks in our community who are familiar with that. So those of you who are new, let's use our +1. So if Nancy or I say something that really lands with you, or you're inspired by, you're excited about, resonates, a +1's a really nice way for me and Nancy to kind of get a sense of where our audience is at. Kim from my team is here. The brilliant Kim will be taking note of any questions that you have as we go through so that we can answer them at the end, hopefully. So to answer your question, how did I get into this work? To make a 15-year story short and succinct. So my background is in design. So I was really lucky that I discovered something that I was very passionate about while I was at school, and I had an incredible art teacher who kind of made me believe that anything was possible. And so in my mind, I had decided I was going to be the next Steve Jobs, the next James Dyson. I was going to build a product that would change the world and make me very rich. And then I went to university and discovered this discipline of service design, which was a kind of evolution of product design that was much more focused on experience. So I know there'll be lots of design thinkers, UXers, product managers, product owners in the room just now. Give me a +1 if that is you, because all these disciplines are very established now, whereas this was kind of back in early 2000s when it was a very emerging discipline. And so that led to me co-founding what was to become one of the UK's most successful service design consultancies. And since then, I have been building businesses and ventures in and around social change. And kind of halfway through that journey, found myself in a really privileged position of being on stages and being invited to speak in front of beautiful people who listen. And I was in my early 20s and was really quite naive to, why am I the only woman in these rooms? Why am I the only person with a regional accent? Why every time I go to a design conference, I see the same 5 men give the same average presentation? And so that was the seed of UPFRONT, where this idea of how do we make conference stages more diverse and accessible. And then over the course of 6 years, lots of prototyping and testing. UPFRONT is now my full-time venture. We're a company of 9 people. We have a global community, and we have an incredible flagship product, our bond. And that's where we are now.
Sorry, I was on mute because I had a screaming child on stage right. So
all good.
Okay, so thank you for that. Gosh, so inspiring. I want I want to be Lauren when I grow up. So totally fangirling over here. You know, and when I think about some of the themes that have come to light in your bonds, learning about imposter syndrome, that was like revolutionary for me and a gateway for me into this work circle like 2013. And for those of you who might be new to the concept, imposter syndrome can be defined as like internal experience of believing maybe that you're not as competent as others perceive you to be. And in a nutshell, it's like feeling like you're a fraud and that you're going to be found out, you're going to be had. And I wanted to share that we were lucky enough to have like 40 plus Onfido women go through this program and like face their imposter syndrome head on. And the results were notable. So 20% of the people that we had put through this bond program of UPFRONT were promoted within the first year. And we had 3 nominations and 2 finalists for industry accolades, and another like a bunch more recognized for internal company awards. And one such woman commented that UPFRONT helped her like quiet the imposter syndrome overall and control it when it pops up. So all of that to say, my question is this. It must be so gratifying to see those tangible impact of your work in the day-to-day lives of women. So how did you go about landing that goal of changing confidence for 1 million women?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is very gratifying, and it makes me, you know, I could just burst with pride listening to you tell those stories, Nancy. And it's also what keeps me going and what keeps me motivated, because we all know the statistics around being a female CEO, being a woman founder, being a mission-led company. You know, the stats are not in our favor. So not only am I battling with all of the barriers and the kind of systemic inequalities around that, but my product is essentially a product that is trying to create equality. So not only am I asking people to buy my product, to engage with my business, I'm also asking them to buy into the idea of feminism and intersectionality and equity. And that's really hard, you know. So hearing these stories are what keeps me and all my team going and motivated and excited. And I think the 1 million women, and you know, we really want to support women and non-binary people. We're working hard to really start to engage more with our LGBTQ plus community and friends, and really understand how confidence being a gendered issue affects everyone of all genders. And you know, women and non-binary people are not an homogenous group. We are no more equal than women and men are. So we put a lot of emphasis on this idea of intersectionality and understanding the role that whiteness plays in the conversations we're having about confidence and power. And I think the 1 million women was probably, you know, to be really honest with you, there wasn't a huge amount of conversation and strategy around that. I think it was probably my instinct and nature to be bold and to stand for something. And I quite like that it gets a reaction out of people, and it inspires. Some people are super inspired, but you can also see the people going, that's really big. You think you're going to do that? It's like, yeah, I am. Watch, we're doing it. So it was more of a kind of like a personal motivator. And now that it's really captured the hearts and minds of our community and lots of folks who are part of our work, now we are working to think about how are we quantifying that and what does that mean? Because, you know, I could put a video on TikTok tomorrow and it gets 1 million views.
Right.
Does that count? Or, you know, the stats that you've just shared around 20% of your bond cohort getting promoted, you know, that is mirrored across all our bonds, and we've had thousands of people graduate from a bond now. So we're kind of having to do that retrospective work of how do we gather that data and how do we start measuring this progress. And also for our global bond, who are very present in this community. So our global bond is lots of folks who do our 6-week program, they then graduate into our global bond. It's more like a membership community. And we have meetups and speakers and book clubs and of course, amazing conferences. And so the folks in our global bond are working really intentionally on this every week. Every Friday, we're checking in with progress. We're making more money. We're having uncomfortable conversations. We're making big decisions. And so our job is now, how are we going to capture that and start to watch that tally tick up, 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 up and up?
So exciting. And like the work that you do and the work that I do, it's definitely like not for the faint of heart. You have to you have to have a lot of gumption, right? And so I love that you just kind of put your stake in the ground there. And I think what's also important to note, but difficult to quantify, is the fact that this work is contagious, right?
Yes.
So somebody that goes through a bond program might have a son who they're raising in a certain way. And, it trickles in ways you don't even maybe understand and comprehend. And so I think that just really, on the times where you need some of that pep and pick me up is just really understanding the ripples of this work.
Yeah. And that's why parenting is a really good example. And that's why if you get my newsletter or you listen to my podcast, I'm always saying, send me messages, DM me, email me, and people do. And it's these messages that trickle in, whether it's like, conversations with husbands, starting to parent differently, leaving toxic friendships, voting for the first time. It's like, yes, every single one is a win.
It's so great. Okay. So talk to me a little bit about finding your voice amongst introverts. What advice do you have for folks kind of like myself too, who don't necessarily fancy themselves as, getting on top of the stage and grabbing the mic? What advice do you have?
Yeah, so I think the introvert extrovert thing is so fascinating because it has really hooked people. Like as a society, we have latched on to these labels, and that's because human beings like clarity and we like categorization and we like labels, even though there's a whole argument that none of that's particularly healthy. We like to put each other in boxes. Excuse me. So it's much easier for you and I to avoid having maybe an uncomfortable conversation about my visibility at work if we both latch straight onto the idea that, well, I'm an introvert, so why would we have that conversation?
Yeah.
So my stance on that is always, I think extroversion and introversion is a sliding scale, and all of us move along that scale depending on our circumstances, depending on the context, depending on our mental health, depending on our mood, depending on how safe we feel. There'll be folks here, and give me a +1 if this resonates, where there's one area of your life where you are really sure and you trust yourself and you show up feeling your full self. And there will be other areas of your life where you feel crippled to the point of procrastination and you're doubting yourself and you get stuck in negative spirals. And those two things live side by side and coexist. So my advice is always to try not to get too attached to those labels. I also think it's really important, and I say this as a huge extrovert, I'm very aware that I am at the extreme end, and believe it or not, my partner is at the extreme end of introversion, and I've now managed to find myself with an introverted child, which is hard for me. That we do live in a world that celebrates extroversion. We live in a world where extroverted confidence is what we are taught to believe is the norm. And I think that is harmful. That's why we talk about a confidence revolution, because confidence can be silent, can be quiet, can be soft, can be gentle. equating confidence with competence can be a dangerous place to be. And we've all worked in teams where the loudest person and the person who takes up the most space gets the most power, even though they are not the most credible person in the room. So for introverts, I would say, hold on to this idea that you do not need to change yourself, that you can and should find a way to express yourself and show up in a way that feels good for you. So maybe that's writing, maybe that's photography, maybe it's through bringing people together, creating community, being a gatherer of like-minded people. You know, standing up and taking up space on a stage is just one way of telling stories. Do I believe every single person should want to do that or do that? No, but I want to build a world where no matter who you are, if you get the opportunity to do that, or you need to do that to get the pay rise, to get the pitch, to get the attention, whatever the thing is you need to get, you know how to do it.
I love that. I love the, not placing judgment or label on who you are, but then also comma, and here's how to play in the world that we're in.
Yeah.
They're two separate but ubiquitous notions. And
Yeah.
it's actually the timing of this particular question is so germane. I'm actually reading this book called I just started it. It's called The Highly Sensitive Person. And it goes through all these things. And it's like about how the world really does, recognize and reward people that are, hey, look at me. And how do you, play in that space? So really appreciate that conversation. And then when you're talking about spectrums as well, one place of your life, you're there, another place is crippling.
Yeah.
It's so funny. My nanny just the other day, she was like, I'm coming up against a 2-year-old who is fierce and a 5-year-old who is probably operationally defiant. And she's like, I hear you when you're working. I listen sometimes through the door. Know what voice you're capable of. And I know that you have complete power over that situation. She's like, I need you to take that and apply it to your children. And I was like, all right. So
it's good advice. Bedtime, for those of you who have little people in your life, reading bedtime stories is a really safe and gentle way to practice accessing different types of voices. And I don't mean like putting on voices as a character, but we've all got a heart, head and gut voice, which is something that we run through in our course, and most of us operate in the same voice all of the time. So I operate in a gut voice, which combined with a Glasgow accent can be a bit intense for people, but the gut voice is the kind of voice that you would use if you were trying to rally a crowd or you were at the front of a protest. Your head voice is the voice that you would use if you were kind of talking through a spreadsheet or thinking about your tax return. So it's like, Steve Jobs very infamously had a very head voice. And then your heart voice is like the Oprah Winfrey's and the Michelle Obamas, who speak very softly and gently, and it's almost like feathers and kindness. And being able to access those 3 different voices is something that can really help people when it comes to finding different ways to assert yourself and to tell your stories. But with the introvert extrovert thing, I also think, to say this with love, both, but mainly introverts, I hear introverts using their introversion as an excuse. And I would love for that not to happen. Similarly, we see extrovert, oh, sorry for interrupting, I'm an extrovert. It's like, no, learn to listen. But I see too many brilliant introverts just opting out immediately, like, not for me, I'm an introvert. And I would love you to just stay and find a way that works for you, holding in mind that, yes, this, we're operating in a system that's not in your favor, but there's brilliant examples of brilliant and beautiful introverts who tell their story on the world stage, and you can too.
I love that call to action. And I think it's really important. And I also think it's really important in work that we're doing with our leaders is, creating spaces for people to interact differently, creating asynchronous spaces. I think Marissa Silk is an Onfidoer who's on the call, who's been a really good advocate for that in terms of how to, interface across time zones in effective ways. So that's something that we're really, working on. So it's not just the burden isn't on the individual, the burden isn't on the introvert themselves, which I think is really important. But the other thing that you mentioned about voice, that lands with me. And I just remember being right out of college and into a pretty male dominated older people sales job. Whereas on the phone, I remember very viscerally changing my voice from a high pitch and a question mark to a that guttural that you talked about. And it really did make such a difference. And so that just really pinged on that memory for me. Okay, so my next question is, like I talked about, male dominated industry. Many of us that are right now do work in a male dominated industry. How does that impact our confidence, and how do we, I guess, navigate that as we're doing this work?
So I think it navigates our confidence hugely, because so much of confidence is about feeling safe to be yourself, and feeling comfortable to be yourself, and feeling comfortable to trust yourself, to speak up, to know that when you speak up, people will listen. And we all know the stats. We've all got friends or have scary stories of our own of working in male-dominated environments, think particularly in tech, where there's little safety, there's little trust, there's a lot of ego, there's cultures of fear and blame. I read a stat recently that said 94% of women in tech feel that they are held to a higher level of accountability than their male peers. And we know that all of these statistics are amplified and then some if you are a Black and brown woman. The statistics for Black and brown women in male-dominated environments are truly horrendous. So I think one piece of it is about recognizing the system that you're in, recognizing that this is not about you failing as an individual or you not being confident enough or asserting yourself enough, that the majority of this is about the culture that you're operating in. And I would be working hard to find allies and friends. We've also all got brilliant men in our work teams, in our lives, who want to learn how to take up less space, how to be a true advocate, how do we design team meetings that are fairer so everybody's voice gets heard. So I would really try and connect with those people. And then the other thing I would think about is how you find community, and where is your community? People ask me all the time, what is this magic thing that you're doing in the bond that's having such a significant impact? There's a few answers to that, but one of the core answers is always community. I really, really believe that confidence needs community, because confidence is something that ebbs and flows. It's up and down. It's a messy, wild roller coaster ride, and your community is what helps pick you back up. It buoys you, it keeps you consistent. There's shared language, there's shared stories, shared friendship, shared accountability. And that's why things like Women in Identity are so amazing, because you're saying we can see a need for a community in this sector. So whether it's Women in Identity, whether it's the bond, whether it's your employee resource groups and companies like Onfido, I would work hard to find that community so that you can connect with the other women, the other queer people, the other Black and brown women who are in your community. And then I think the fourth piece is about the good old fashioned sphere of influence that I always like to talk about. So I think when we think about this, it can start to feel like a wall that's just insurmountable, because every single sector is male dominated to some extent. You know, the statistics are still really poor when we look at leadership and boards. And so when you're in a company and you look up and don't see yourself, it's really hard to think this company wants me here and wants me to grow and wants me to develop and succeed. And so I think it's about recognizing, even though that does feel like a big, huge wall that's so hard to tear down, you really do have agency and power, whether it's just you and your 1-person team, or you and your 5-person team, or you and your department, or you and your community. You do have agency to start asking questions, to start running meetings differently, to bring in external speakers, to start a book club so people can start to get educated. You know, there are things that we can all do, because I do see a lot of, and this is also valid, but this kind of hopelessness, despair of like, well, what's the point? And, you know, I'm a doer. I want you to take action. You can complain 3 times, and then you have to try and do something about it. And even if it's something small, like a reading group where we're all going to read Fix the System, Not the Women, or we're all going to read Invisible Women, you know, we're going to read a text that's going to help us get on the same page around how these things are affecting our workplace and are affecting our productivity.
I love that. The three strikes.
Yeah.
You get 3 complaints and then you got to do something. I think that's really important. And especially, like I said, with the work that we do, you know, it is not for the faint of heart, and it can feel discouraging. And so, you know, really keeping that lens and that focus on what's the small thing I can do, because it does have that ripple effect that goes beyond what you see. So important.
And it's building a support network, asking for help, damn sure making sure you're getting paid the same as your male counterparts. And, you know, controversially, you can also find a new job. Maybe I'm not allowed to say that here, but, you know, no job, we've seen it from Jacinda Ardern, Nicola Sturgeon in the last few weeks, no job is worth losing your fire, losing your confidence over. And, you know, I think there's another piece for white women who find themselves in these male-dominated environments, really need to take on this reality that white women still have so much power to change that. And we have so much work to do in white women taking responsibility for changing that reality, because the power that whiteness affords you in those situations is really significant.
Very much so. And I think there's an element of, you know, that privilege of saying I can find another job, right? Of I can leave what is not sparking me. You know, we're not all in that situation and to the same degree.
Of course.
So, you know, totally appreciate that as well. Okay. So when we talk about action and doing something, what is, I guess, one thing that we can all do tomorrow that's going to give us a big old confidence boost?
Well, one thing you can do tomorrow is, I mean, there's a few. I think my favorite that I'll share with you today is to stop saying sorry. So we have a tendency to apologize unnecessarily for everything. And this goes across all cultures. And yes, I think Canadians and Brits are particularly guilty of this. But there are lots of studies that show women in particular are incessantly apologizing. Now, am I advocating for never saying sorry? Of course not. Sorry is a beautiful, significant, important word, and sometimes you have to say sorry. But most of the time, when you're saying sorry, you don't need to say sorry. And I know that there's folks in the chat who have experienced that journey of learning not to say sorry, and it's had a really significant impact. For those of you who are new to this idea, I'd love to see in the chat, like, what does that bring up for you or make you think when I say stop saying sorry? Because sorry, you're minimizing yourself, and you're minimizing yourself in your own mind and externally. So, you know, if you're going to go and see a stand-up comedian or watch someone give a talk and they start their speech with an apology, you don't feel great about what's going to happen in the next 30 minutes. Sends a very strong signal to the people listening that you don't value yourself, that you don't trust yourself. So stop saying sorry would be my first kind of strategy that I would love you just to reflect on and think about. And then my second one would be think about your relationship with celebrating yourself, and how do you acknowledge the small wins in your day right through to the larger wins in your work, in your family, in your home life. You know, there are multiple studies that show capturing and logging wins increases your self-confidence. And I know from doing this work with many women in the bond, it can be very uncomfortable at first, because you immediately start thinking, well, I don't really have any wins. And like, sure, I had this really uncomfortable conversation with my mum, but like, that's not a win because and when you start to shift that mindset and start to look for these wins, you will start to notice them. And it's like, once you flick the switch, you can't flick it back off, and it does start to build your confidence. And then of course, you know, you've got my podcast, on my Instagram, I put out free content every day that will give you that injection of reframing how you're thinking about your confidence, how you're showing up for yourself and for others. So there's lots of resources on there you can check out too.
Hashtag sorry, not sorry, right?
Precise, yeah.
Okay, so many folks here are either leading teams or a part of teams. How can we help teams be more confident?
So I think the team piece is really linked to the psychological safety idea that we talked about before. So for those of you who are not familiar with the notion of psychological safety, Google did a very large study to try and understand what makes some teams brilliant and some teams not. And they came up with 5 significant factors that impact a team's productivity and effectiveness. And the number one thing was psychological safety. And that is defined by a brilliant researcher whose name's gone out of my head. So I was going to say Amy Cuddy, and it's not Amy Cuddy. I can't remember. But a brilliant researcher who coins this term as the willingness to speak up and talk about mistakes without fear of reprimand. And she's done amazing studies across hospitals and said that psychological safety in a doctor's team saves lives. Psychological safety in a classroom can change a child's development. Amy Edmondson, thank you, Sandra. I knew it was an Amy. I appreciate that. And so when it comes to teams, I really believe that you need a culture of psychological safety where everybody's confidence can show up, regardless of what shape and size that confidence is. So it's not just this kind of extroverted, gregarious confidence that we're all used to witnessing and rewarding. And so one tool that I always introduce to the teams we work with is something called a check-in. So you check in and you can check out. And it's a tool that you can use at the start of a meeting, at the start of a conversation. We could have done it today in this session. And it essentially means one facilitator asks a question of everybody in the room. And it's a way to take the temperature of the room. So for example, every team meeting, we have one of us will host a check-in and we'll say, what are you bringing with you into this meeting today? And I might say, well, I'm a bit distracted because my kid's about to arrive home from school and I don't want him to interrupt this meeting. And Kim might say, I'm absolutely buzzing because we've enrolled a new client today and I was super excited to meet them. And somebody else will say something in between. So it's just top of mind. What that does is it means that we are much less likely to misunderstand each other because we've had that moment to see where everybody is at. So if I know you're anxious because your cat is at the vet, I'm going to judge you less for not being super present in this meeting because I know where you're at. Studies also tell us that when you hear everybody's voice at the start of a meeting, you're more likely to hear everybody's voice throughout the duration of the meeting. And I know far too many women who have shared with me that they sometimes spend their whole day in meetings and don't talk. And that is because those meetings are poorly designed and those meetings are poorly facilitated. And so each of us, we all show up in meetings, regardless of where we're at in our career, what kind of job we do. Most of us here will go to meetings, and you have agency to make that meeting better, to make space for everybody's voice to be heard. And it sounds simple, but that can be an incredibly, that can really generate confidence in a team. And then I think the second thing is to have a conversation, have a team chat. Like, let's chat about confidence. Like, what does it mean to you? What does it look like to you? What do you need to feel confident? That's an onboarding question. What do you need to feel confident in this team? Tell me about a time that your confidence was taken away at work so that I can make sure that that doesn't happen here. And again, I know where you're coming from. So yeah, there's a lot that we can do to help each other.
I've been thinking a lot about this lately, especially with the remote environment and how, you might not be bringing in that same, like, in many ways it's useful, but in many ways you're kind of behind a blurred or red screen, right? And you're not, it can bring a level of separation and a level of disconnect that I think requires additional action and additional intentionality, and additional precision from you as an individual, you as a team member, and you as a leader. And so, I think if this is the world we're in now, right? And where we're not just going to pick up on what's going on with coworkers by virtue of just seeing it happen in the office, we've got to build these in. So I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah, I agree. I think remote working can make all of this more complex, but it's also an incredible way to, equal the playing field in many ways. It means that we can work together and work with people in ways that might not have been possible before. But I think it means you need to be even more intentional about how your meetings are designed, the technology you use to set up your meetings so that everybody can engage and be seen and be heard. And I think there's things that you can do as an individual to help yourself, like making sure you have some time before each meeting to kind of stand up, stretch, get your light in the right place. I do it myself, where I find myself catching my tail in this day and I'm in these back-to-back calls and I've, still not brushed my teeth. And it's like, that's not great for anybody's confidence. You need to give yourself time to prepare the same way you would if you were getting on the metro and going to have a face-to-face meeting in Charing Cross. It's too easy to just kind of show up because the technology enables that. So I think do yourself a favor. And I actually have a video on my Instagram about how to own the room when there is no room, like how to own the room when it's a Zoom. Right. And I think that kind of preparing yourself is something that we can all do more of, and that is fully in our control. And things like investing in proper headphones and a proper light so that you feel good about how you're showing up, because there's nothing worse than you can't see each other and you're trying to hide things in the background, and all of that's just distracting from you showing up as the best version of yourself.
I think that's so great. Okay, so your tagline for the up and coming conference is activating grace in a world on fire. Can you tell us more about what that means and what that really looks like?
Of course. So I think this theme came from, a conversation in our team about we're having our very first in-person gathering. We're opening our doors to the world. Everyone is welcome to join. We've been working for 3 years online. This feels like a very significant moment. What do we want people to feel like when they leave? Why do we want people to, look at our website and think, I need to be there? And the overwhelming message was, we want to be real and honest and true, that the last 3 years, in so many ways, for so many of us, have been an absolute shit show, for lack of a better word. There has been so much trauma and tragedies and crises, and we are all being exposed to this in a way that we are not used to because of social media, right through from COVID to that changing our working environments, Black Lives Matter movement, police misogyny, there's just the climate crisis. There's a lot, I think that's like a phrase we all hear ourselves say, like, this is a lot all of the time. And so we wanted to be really real about that and acknowledge that it can feel like we are living in a world that's on fire. And how do we acknowledge that reality, but also give ourselves and each other grace to be patient with ourselves, to be kind to ourselves, to make space for rest, for healing, for development, for growth? And then what does that look like in and around themes of leadership, confidence, community? And so we landed on it really quickly. It felt right. And I've really loved seeing people's eyes light up when I tell them what the theme is and kind of what it means and what it looks like. And, we've got some incredible speakers, ranging from topics like politics. We've got Mandu Reid, who's the first woman of colour to run a UK political party. She's the leader of the Women's Equality Party. Right through to Cecilia Felihoy, who became famous overnight because she was in the Tinder Swindler documentary. She found herself in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt in a very toxic relationship with a man that, caused her huge amount of trauma and just a lot of hard stuff. And now she's telling her story around how society treats women who are victims, right through to authors who are going to teach us how to get more comfortable with writing. And we have a choir, and we have poets, and we have an artist. And so, it's those things sitting side by side. It's like the reality is we have police misogyny and gender violence, and we also have music and joy and art and playfulness. And we wanted to really bring those things together. I'm really excited and would love to welcome all of you here. You can join us in person in Glasgow, or you can join us digitally, and all the ticket holders get recordings of all the talks. So whether you're in person or digitally, you won't miss out on anything. And of course, Onfido are one of our sponsors, which we're super grateful for.
I am so excited for everything that you're doing, and this conference is going to just knock it out of the park. I think it's going to really be a jewel in the year for many. Yeah, so
I'm going to write that down. I like that. A jewel in the year.
Jewel in the year. So that was the bulk of questions that I have. I know that there are a couple of questions I saw in the Q&A. And want to give folks chance to ask any questions that this might have brought up.
Brilliant. And thank you for asking such good questions, Nancy. I really appreciate it. So we have two questions in the chat box. How does one find genuine male allies in male-dominated environments? I mean, I don't think there's any easy way to do that other than to put yourself out there a little and, start to have the conversations, start to ask for help, reach out, ask others, like, who are the allies that you've connected with in our organization? Do you know somebody who might support me with this? Unfortunately, I don't think there's any silver bullet to that. And of course, every organization is different. Nancy, how would you, for example, if someone in Onfido was saying to you, how do I find male allies? How would you think about that in your organization?
Well, luckily in our organization, we actually have an employee resource group that is allies based and heavily male. So we do have a space that conversation has already started to take place. So I would point in that direction. But, I think that was really ungated because we were having these educational conversations. We were talking about allyship. We were talking about what people need to feel psychologically safe. So I think the first start there is overall just education and awareness. So that's more of like at a company level. And then, personally for me, what I've done is I have, found folks who maybe have skills and attributes different than I do. And oftentimes that is, the male leader. And I hook into like a mentorship relationship. And so, kind of putting those types of feelers out there is good as well.
Yeah. I think, that there's an answer in there around bringing some sort of structure so that men who want to and are these types of people can be more findable. Donna's got a great question. How to respond to others' resistance to you becoming more confident? This is a really big question, and it's a really big theme in Upfront because it's a consequence that I don't think we talk about enough of growth. It's like that idea of you will lose people when you grow, and that can feel really scary and unsettling and uncomfortable. And it's another reason why I think community is so key to these growth journeys. And so I think my advice to you would be to sit with the sadness and the kind of grief and loss of maybe the relationships that are ending or the people that are leaving your life because of your growth. Don't brush it away in kind of irritation and annoyance, because it's real, even though it's for a good reason, because obviously you want to grow and be better. That sadness and loss is still there, and it's a thing that I think you should allow yourself to feel. And I would hold on to this idea that there are so many people who are going to love you and adore you and champion you and cheerlead you, like that you can't even imagine right now because you've not met them yet, but they are in your future. I promise. And sometimes I think to myself that feeling, I don't know if I feel resistance, but I often feel loneliness. And I think it's that idea of that's a very natural consequence of being a leader, of being progressive, of being at the front. And so it kind of takes the personal sting out of it, and there's some sort of solace there, but also recognizing that you are not alone, because there's hundreds and thousands of women and non-binary people all over the world who are growing and healing and changing and learning how to be boundaried and learning to speak up for themselves and building things and starting companies and changing their teams. And that's why being visible is so powerful, because then you can find each other and you can support each other. I hope that helps, Donna.
So good. Well, I think we're bumping right up against time. This conversation
Perfect.
has been super uplifting to me. I'm so glad
Good.
that we have it in this forum and really like gift the women in identity some of these insights. And for those of you who are not part of Women in Identity, please sign up. It's free and open to all. For those of you that are interested in learning more about Lauren, the conference UPFRONT and Bonds, I think that there's some information in the chat, and don't be afraid to reach out to her as well. And then either Kate, Kim, or Lauren, any last words?
Yeah, just thank you so much to Kate and the team at Women in Identity. Thank you, Nancy, for being the bridge between our two worlds and always being such an avid supporter of our work. I would say to folks who are kind of new to me and UPFRONT, follow me on Instagram. That's the best place. You can talk to me directly. If you have questions that come up you didn't get to ask today, you can ask me on there. All the links to all the things I've talked about you can find through my Instagram. And if you've enjoyed today, I would really love for you to talk about it on your social media place of choice. Maybe it's LinkedIn, maybe it's Instagram, because these things really help Women in Identity and UPFRONT and Onfido reach new audiences. And it's always really lovely to make new connections and welcome new people into our communities. So just thank you so much for being here, for asking such great questions, for being such a good audience. It's been really fun.
Thank you, and +1 to all of that, and go forth and conquer
Yes.
the day and evening.
Yes. Bye, everybody.